This is Success Without Stress with Bob Roth on Sirius XM Indie.
This is Bob Roth, and I'm here today with a very dear friend, brother, Russell Brand, who I have known for over 5 years. I taught him Transcendental Meditation in September of 2009. And back in New York, I think I met you the first time at a Soho Grand Hotel. And then you did a performance, and then we all flew out to Fairfield, Iowa, to Maharishi University of Management. And that's when we started Transcendental Meditation. And the one story I remember was someone had told me, I said, I'm going to go meet Russell Brand. And they said, oh, you know, he's a very funny man. See if he's going to take you seriously. May not, I don't know if I ever told you this, take you seriously. And I said, I'll just go. So I went to the bar, and you came up to me, and we stood about 3 inches apart. And I said, you said, are you going to teach me Transcendental Meditation? And I said, it depends upon if you have the time. And you told me, I've been searching for the timeless my whole life. I have as much time as you want. And that moment, sort of, it was like done. And I have been devoted to you as a friend ever since. And I'm very grateful that you're on this show to talk about your book, to talk about meditation, to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And what is your recollection of those first days?
I recall being taught by you, Bob Roth, to transcend between the MTV VMA Awards on one hand, here in New York City at the Radio City Hall. And after going to Iowa, I went to Angola Prison, Louisiana State Penitentiary. So between the VMAs and Angola Prison, I spent a week with you in Fairfield, Iowa, looking at the gleaming domes, thinking about the sort of Vedic principles around TM, learning TM, and trying to, you know, for a lot of people, the idea of meditation is challenging, because I think I had this sort of, what I now recognise as quite a cliched response. I don't know if I'll be able to meditate because my mind is so busy and I'm always thinking and I find it hard to stop thinking. So it came at a very poignant and significant time in my life, and it's been I've not been able to fulfil the David Lynch he's that's the hardcore never missed a session, but I've been good with it. It's a part of my life. It's become part of my identity.
Were you like a person who thought of meditation as a kid? Was this a new idea? I know you learned to meditate as part of a documentary you're doing on happiness, which is supposed to come out within the millennium.
That's right. It'll be out within the next 1,000 years. That's the aim. Fingers crossed. Over the next 1,000 or so. That's the intention.
No, but that was you. Were you just sort of doing it as a lark, or was meditation something that was significant for you?
I've been doing yoga for, at that point, I guess 5 years since I got clean from drugs and alcohol, and I would argue that even addictions such as I had it was its own form of spiritual quest, that it's a sense of disease, unease and dissatisfaction that led me to chemical dependency. Also, in childhood, I had a sort of annoying and frustrated sense that consciousness and life as I was experiencing it was not the complete picture, that I was being somehow shortchanged. And I remembered once I'd learned to meditate that I used to, when I was a kid, about sort of 7 years old, I used to sort of sit and say, what happens if I just can't try and think this word again and again? What happens if I just think my own name, Russell, 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 Russell? What happens? What will my brain do if I just don't let it think anything but Russell, 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 Russell? So I had sort of like consciousness, awareness, awakeness. These ideas sort of always intrigued me before I had the structure or language to understand what meditation was. And I think one of the great things that the David Lynch Foundation does is taking meditation into schools, because I think a lot of young people don't even know that there's the possibility of accessing that kind of serenity and peace. So I had an awareness, I had an interest, and it's always been something I was keen to understand even before I understood it.
When you look back on your life, and I know you talk often about the sort of the Maya or the illusion of fame and celebrity and all of that, has meditation, your practice of transcendental meditation, anchored you in that unchanging, so you didn't get sort of suckered or sucked up or seduced by relative. Talk a little bit about that, what you mean. Because I think a lot of people, Russell Brand or someone famous, I want that. I want the wealth, I want the fame, Elaborate a little bit on that.
Like all of us, I feel that I'm a multifaceted individual. And even now, 5 years into TM, 11 years into recovery and yoga, and I consider myself to be quite diligent about the way I conduct my life and my behaviour. There are still some quite entrenchant patterns of behaviour and forms of fear and desire that are difficult to let go of. We're in a nice hotel now. I don't go to people when I arrive in New York, take me to an ashram, or I'll just sleep in the street, it'll be okay, it'll work out. And I still respond powerfully to attractive women. I'm a heterosexual man. That program, that formula, is still in me. I still sometimes feel that I've got the right to impose my will on other people. But what has happened, I think, as a result of Transcendental Meditation, certainly it's run concurrently with it, is a sense that I have now an ability I've cultivated an ability to step back from the phenomena of my life, from the mechanics of my feelings, and go, right, do I really want to lose my temper in this situation, or do I really want to act on that desire, or do I really want to act on that fear? And sometimes I do. Sometimes I don't have the freedom. I still do. But increasingly, I've noticed that the hypnotic power of the material world has decreased. Some of that may be because I've been doing the same thing for a long time. When I wanted to be famous, I wasn't famous yet. So for me, it could have been a solution. It could have been an epiphany. It could have been enlightenment, a revolution, a transition. But certainly, since practicing regular meditation, the way I see myself, the way I see the world, and what I want for myself has changed. It's interesting, isn't it, that the vast majority of our anatomical functions occur without cognizance, without instruction. We are sitting on this, when people go, what's going on behind the scenes? Are there Illuminati? What's happening? Perhaps because our whole body is run without our permission. Our kidneys, our gastric system, our cells are healing and reproducing without any knowledge of it. So there are obviously different forms of consciousness. There are different forms of being, even within myself or anyone as an individual. Meditation, I think, has given me a new aspect, a new facet through which to access that. So I always have to be mindful of pointing out that it's not like, oh yeah, I used to be like a crazy drug addict and a womanizer, and now I'm just basically sat around with a blanket wrapped around me, looking at a cool, calm lake and thinking George Harrison lyrics. I'm not. I'm still I have it in me. I've got desire in me. I've got fear in me. I've got lust. I'm full of human, flesh-based stuff. But what's happened is a neglected aspect of me has been awoken and cultivated through this meditative practice.
And what does it do for you? What does the meditation do for you that allows that to happen?
Firstly, I love how Jerry Seinfeld talks about meditation, because he's plain, isn't he? How he talks about it. It's like plugging in your mobile phone and charging it 20 times, like for 20 minutes, a couple of times a day. Plain. For me, I never able to articulate myself or any aspect of my life so succinctly, or so. That's what he does as a comedian, isn't it? He identifies things, he renders it succinctly, he personalizes it, he packages it. He's masterful, literally, at that. For me, I'm not so good at causality, but what I know is that I am calmer now. I'm less reactive. I think I'm more compassionate, because I've always talked a good game with the compassion. I've always known that you're not meant to hurt other people's feelings. Don't try and make yourself happy through self-fulfillment. It won't lead to anything. You've got to put other people before yourself. Otherwise, you're living in a kind of a sort of a loop of self-deception that your own life's important or overly important. And the point I'm at now is I think I would like that my meditation goes beyond those 2 20-minute periods and affects me throughout the day, affects my every interaction, affects all of my behaviour. And in ways that I don't fully understand or can't entirely discern, I'm sure it does. I think that what I try to do now is to recognize in everyone I meet the possibility for their beauty, their divinity, their sweetness. Like the way I pray, for example, has changed. Like, you know, like, and that's not, I would never have done before meditation. As well as meditation, I pray, and prayer for me is about formulating my relationship with myself and with higher consciousness or non-local consciousness or alternative consciousness, or God, or however you want to term it. And I sort of think, on a daily basis, I say and I pray that for gratitude. I am grateful to be alive and to have this life. I pray to live courageously. I pray to be healing. I pray that no one comes away from me feeling cheated or hurt, that everyone I interact with feels better as a result of having interacted with me. You know, and that's one of the early signs that I'm off the beam, that I'm out of whack, that I'm not in alignment, is when I think, oh, that person's just walked away looking a bit hurt and disappointed. What are you doing? I also want to be in communion, constant communion with otherness. I ask each day that God communicate with me. I want to feel God everywhere, through serendipity, through coincidence, that every interaction is a possibility for a relationship and conversation with God. And I pray finally to be in alignment with God's will, that my individualistic, animally driven will be put aside for a higher purpose.
And this, Maharishi, who introduced Transcendental Meditation, would just say it's beautiful expression of a transparency and a translucence of the inner nature of life. He said this is everyone's birthright. I mean, human beings can live in accord and in harmony with natural laws, with God's laws. Doesn't matter what religion you adhere to or no religion. And that just by accessing that agitated thinking mind, just allowing it to move in the direction. The analogy that I use is of a cross-section of an ocean, waves on the surface, and that's the gotta mind, but deep within an ocean is silent. The waves are on the surface naturally, it's silent at the depths of the ocean. And meditation properly practiced, effortlessly practiced, just allows the attention to settle down towards that. And when the mind settles down towards that, your brain waves change, become more coherent, more orderly, and things like cortisol levels. I mean, cortisol, which is an anxiety hormone, a nervous hormone, those drop 40% in 20 minutes of TM as opposed to 10% from a good night's sleep. So that alignment is not just in your heart, not just in your mind, it's physiological, it's everything. So when you say the whole purpose of meditation is that it infuses all moments of life are meditative. I mean, you take 20 minutes twice a day to sit in silence, but its purpose is to infuse and inform the rest of your life. When you said you weren't sure how much it's changed you, it's the same for me. I mean, I've been doing this thing for 45 years. Someone says to me, how has it changed you? I don't know. I think of a little bit when my grandmother used to come and see me when I was 5 years old, and she said, oh, Bobby, you've grown so much, because she hadn't seen me in 2 years. I didn't know I've grown. It's just me. The growth is so imperceptible but so natural that there's not a contrast. But my experience of you, I mean, I'm just thinking, are you kidding? You know, the equanimity, the focus, the clarity, the compassion, the kindness from when I first met you is a night and day difference. And when I teach someone to meditate, I automatically feel very close to that person, and Russell in particular. I, as I said when I opened the show, was this immediate connection. And another thing that I feel about you, and I've told you this before, I remember when I taught you at Maharishi University of Management in Iowa, we were sitting out on the way TM is taught, you learn it one-to-one on the first day, and then the next 3 days you meet for about an hour and talk. And I remember we were out on that lake, by that lake, and we had done a meditation, and I opened my eyes, and I looked over at you, and the thought was, this guy could change the world. And I actually had a thought like the Beatles. I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but I think I told you that before. Like the impact that they had to make a change. And this I'm going to transition now into your book. But because I read about your book and I read reviews, and I just saw the interview you did in The Guardian, long interview in The Guardian. And it struck me as a child of the 60s, because I went to school at University of California at Berkeley in 1968, and wanted to change the world, worked for Bobby Kennedy, that so much of your message and the way you're saying it, you're almost a lone voice compared to my generation. There were so many of us saying similar things, but a similar message of love informing transformation. I wanted you to talk about this change, what you're doing now.
Well,
sorry for rambling on there, but I wanted to transition.
I was very focused. It was nice. I was relaxed, Bob. I've just got off an aeroplane. It's very lovely to listen to you and to settle into New York City via the vibration of Bobby Roth. I've written this book, Revolution it is called. When I sat down to write this book, I didn't know what I was going to write. You know, like the two books I've written previously were autobiographies, so there's an obvious linear structure, and it's just a recounting of events and opinions. And this book, I thought, increasingly, after doing my show Messiah Complex and due to events in my life, I thought I can't just spend too much longer. I'm not happy making films and making TV. It's like I'm getting in my, like I said in that prayer, I'm asking for the world to talk to me, and sometimes it will just be I'll hear an image or see a word and I think, oh my God, I'm in communion with something. There are more frequencies of communication, of consciousness, of being, than just a dumb lateral materialistic throb. There's other communion constantly happening. But also more obviously, you've got to take the temperature of your own life, and it was becoming clear that I was not going in the right direction. That's what became clear to me, and that I was still pursuing the ideas of a 15-year-old kid. Like a 15-year-old kid, I want to be in movies, I want to live this kind of life, I want to be thought of in this way, and fired the catapult of intention back then, and I was still travelling with that momentum, but I couldn't maintain the velocity as I experienced all those places after living in Hollywood. And I'm not saying I'll never make another film again or never be in another TV program, and I met loads of good people and I did loads and loads of things, but I started to feel this yearning, this pull to be closer and closer to the stuff that I think about and talk about when I'm on my own, and it's just happened of its own momentum. As soon, once I wrote that, I realised, hold on a minute, I love doing stand-up comedy. I'm going to write a stand-up comedy show about Che Guevara, Malcolm X, Gandhi and Jesus, and what they mean, and what it is to be a human being, and what it is, what it must have been to be an iconic figure like those men, and to have your meaning reappropriated. And when I did that show, it's like things changed, because I thought, oh wow, that's what I want to talk about is Gandhi. I don't want to go and I don't want to be who I am, and then it's like, right, time to start work. The fun's got to stop. I want it to be an expression, like Joseph Campbell says, follow your bliss. There's this bliss I find in analysing and trying to understand a man like Gandhi or Malcolm X, and I sort of thought, well, I can do that as a job. I'm a free man. I can just go on stage and talk about Malcolm X, and people will come. And I did it, and that experience, what I felt plugged in. I felt plugged in. You talk about like meditation infusing the rest of your life. I felt like it did there. And then I wrote a children's book, a version of the Pied Piper, which ain't out yet. But in it, I sort of thought about the figure of Krishna is this pipe playing figure, and the Pied Piper comes to this town and is sort of like a beyond morality, whether you think he's amoral or immoral or whether I think beyond, this figure is beyond, the trickster character who transforms normality is beyond typical ethical judgment. So and in that I was thinking about that sort of the pipe as a sort of the trickster, I think, is the negotiator, the agency between man and God, between the known and the unknown. And that story came very easily, and it was beautiful. And I think it's beautiful. I hope it's beautiful. And I wrote it to be for children, and like an illustrator. I took it to a publisher. He wanted to do it, and that happened kind of easily. And then writing this book, Revolution, it's more complex, because around doing the press for Messiah Complex, around doing other press stuff I was doing in the UK, I did some writing about revolution, I did some writing, wrote articles about various current affairs and stuff, and I did an interview on TV for this prevalent British interviewer called Jeremy Paxman, and he asked me why I don't vote, and I said the reason I don't vote is because I have no faith in our political process. I see it's dislocated and disingenuous, and I don't feel engaged with it, and I don't feel like it's real. And And then he asked me how he thought change would come, and I said revolution, that there needs to be a revolution, and there will be a revolution. And since then I've thought a lot about revolution in relation to epiphany and psychological change and self-change. And in my own life there has been revolution. I've changed from a person entirely defined by fear, desire, materialism, ego, to a person who is considerably less so. Still there are aspects of my nature, but considerably less so. And I thought, like, but obviously if you start making statements on the television, like there's going to be a revolution, people go, well, what do you mean? What are you, like, what can we do? What are ordinary people going to do? What's that going to look like? And I started to write about my feelings, what it meant to me, and then conducted a series of conversations with different people, like economists, anthropologists, looked at some stuff of Chomsky's and Naomi Klein's, so ecologists, and what I found is that intuitive feeling that I have, and I think a lot of people have, of sort of alienation, discontentment, and like that your life is somehow not quite right and not quite real, and you're being palmed off, is absolutely right. That there are alternatives to capitalism, and that the main thing that in my book that I like, that what became its kind of, I don't know, its spine, its thrust, its the motivating energy behind it became, we've lost touch with who we are as a people. We've lost touch with ourselves as beings, and because our energy has become dissipated, our focus has become disparate. Powerful corporate entities impose their version of what reality should be, and their version of reality is massive inequality and ecological meltdown, and this is only possible because there is no cohesive alternative narrative. Now, it's very difficult to immediately contrive an oppositional political system to entrenchant capitalism, but all of us know that this isn't working. The signs are pretty obvious. The planet is on the precipice of destruction. Inequality is at unprecedented levels, and just on a personal, ordinary level, we feel lost. A lot of people feel lost and dissatisfied, and the only way that this is maintained is because, broadly speaking, in the media, these ideas aren't discussed in a balanced way, and they're like sort of. And I noticed how sort of potent the message is that no, change is impossible. This is the way things are. The way things are is the way that they're meant to be. And I just realised how significant that is, because the first step in maintaining the status quo is that there is no alternative. As soon as people start to think, hey, we could live differently to this, like then that's a significant shift. So this book is meant to be the start of a conversation. There is that, there are practical, material, mechanical ideas in there of, well, look, some countries organise corporations like this. Some people have suggested that corporations could be curtailed, closed down, disbanded even. There's no reason why Exxon or Monsanto should be allowed to do what they want. They're not God. They live like God. But the economy is not real. The economy is a construction. The economy is an idea. It's a notion. It requires our belief, like a dollar bill or a pound note, requires us to believe in the myth of its value. And as soon as we withdraw our consent, as soon as we disobey, it's over. It's over for them. And working in media and being interviewed by conventional media, I face a lot of opposition. But all the time when I'm facing it, I think, I ain't even talking to you. I don't need to talk to you, because I know people are ready. I know people are waking up, because I'm from the world. People seem to think I was like popped out of some little fame pod. I grew up in a normal suburban town on the outskirts of London, and I remember it. And I live with people, and I see them and I talk to them. I'm not talking just about galling inequality of people that are like homeless. I'm talking about ordinary working people across the world can't afford to live properly, while the 6 children of the Walmart owner have as much wealth as collectively 150 million working American people. And this galling inequality, this tyrannical economic system would be acceptable if it was somehow preserving the planet. Look, we've had to tyrannise you to protect the planet, that we've got a higher goal, we've got a higher ideal, but it's also to the detriment of the planet. So what I've tried to do in this book, Bob, is to render as effectively and as simply as I can, leaving the heavy lifting to academics and intellectuals and people who are qualified to do it. I've tried to render that the biggest lie is that there's no alternative. There is an alternative. And the biggest lie is that we can't change it. We can change it. I've tried to address those problems. And from a spiritual perspective, because economics isn't the heart of who we are, spirituality is the heart of who we are. And spirituality just means kindness and connectivity.
Talk a little bit more about, elaborate on that spirituality, kindness, and connectivity. And how do you wake that, how do you see, because I have obviously my thoughts, but how do you see that value, that receptivity? See, hearing you talk, and you're more articulate than anybody, I think, with these issues right now on the world stage. But my frustration back in the 60s was that people didn't hear, or even when work that I've done with talking about the dangers of genetically modified foods, people, they don't respond. There's a sleepiness. So there's something with meditation that I can do that I'm working on, but comment on how you get people to wake up.
I think we have to think about what it is we care about on an individual level, right? Like, say it's like, oh, the rent in my building is too much, or I don't like the way we're being treated at work, right? It's sort of acknowledge that and accept it and approach it from the perspective of it can be changed. If we are connected, it can change. Now, like for me, what I've started to try and do is when I talk to someone, right, I read a beautiful thing. Do you know that writer Emmett Fox? I think he's like a Christian writer. He wrote a book called Sermon on the Mount. You know, like sort of, I guess, I don't know, probably the 30s or 40s, I guess it was written. And in it he said, like, don't judge people. Like he was talking about the sermon of the principles in Christ's Sermon on the Mount. Don't judge people, he said. You know, judge not lest you be judged. Right? And he's saying, well, what that meant is that when someone's behaviour is unappealing to us, when we think they're obnoxious or unattractive, that in them, the Christ in them is calling out to you to be saved, calling out to you who are awake to be saved. There's no value in us judging them or being negative, like, because in political figures or whatever, say sort of, or like, you know, or bigots, obvious bigots, Bill O'Reilly, Rush Limbaugh, my country's Prime Minister David Cameron, like you sort of want to go, you idiots, you know, but like it's kind of you falling into the trap there. Like that, I sometimes wonder what would they do if we just loved them. If we just went, I'm going to love you so hard. Like, how are they going to cope with that? How are they going to cope with the force of actual love? And to see them not as manifestations of darkness or as evil, but confused and conflicted, and that within them, the Christ in them is calling out to be saved. It said in this book, we are all part of the one living garment of God. And there's no value in judging other people. And the literature around spirituality, whether it's the sort of elegant simplicity of Lao Tzu or the charming voluptuousness of the Vedas, the passion of Catholicism, the potency of Islam, everyone is saying, we are all one. We are all one. Don't get confused. Don't get confused by your own conflict. Don't get confused by the contradictions in your own anatomical and biological drives. Don't get confused. Breathe. Take a moment. Look inside yourself. There's something else there. There's an awareness behind your fear. There's an awareness behind your desire. There's an awareness. And if you strengthen your association, your connection to that awareness, it's possible for you to, your life has changed. Your life has changed in that awareness. And I think it transmits and it connects. I think perhaps the parameters that we currently regard the world as defined by, me in my little individual body with my little individual voice and individual haircut and individual opinions and views and beliefs and these words that I'm saying, is a temporary expression of a much more potent thing. And were we to have different eyes, different senses, we would see the vibrations leaking and bleeding and glowing out and tangling amidst one another in some constant, infinite, fractal whir of interconnectivity. But all we have at the moment is the faith that it's there. The faith that it's there. We may never have the knowledge, but we won't really need it if we have the faith.
When we first met at the Soho Hotel after we talked in the bar, and then we sat down with your mates, and you asked me, you know, why are you doing this? Because I've been teaching Transcendental Meditation now for over 40 years, at the time for 35 years, and I said, because I want to change the world. My interest in the beginning was in politics, that I would become a U.S. Senator back in 1968 after I'd worked for Senator Kennedy to try and make the changes that you're talking about. And then being at Berkeley at that time, I lost all faith because I had, you know, there were tear gas and there were tanks parked outside my door, and the divisiveness and the conflict and even the people on the far left were just as violent and divisive as others. So I, through serendipity, I ended up with meditation and became a teacher of Transcendental Meditation. So I said, I'm working to teach Transcendental Meditation. And you said, you're teaching individuals. And I said, yes, we're in schools and we're in businesses and we're here. And you said, that's not practical. You're not going to change the world quickly enough through that. And then I mentioned to you this research that had been done, which showed that just a small percentage of people in a population transcending, experiencing that level of unity, which all the different spiritual traditions have spoken about and which modern physics now calls a unified field. When you access that in meditation and enough people do that, it has a spillover effect. You actually dissipate the the religious tensions and fears and stresses and racial and all those things can actually be dissipated among people who don't meditate. You can actually change the way their brain functions just by dissipating and reducing the stress. And, a small 1% of a population, and you smiled and you said, that is what interests me. I remember that. I remember our discussion because from the beginning you wanted to make a change. And from the beginning you told me that comedy was just a stepping stone for you, that it was just a vehicle, an art form to express transformation. So,
how like me to grandiosely judge your magnificent foundation as being too slow moving and too bespoke after 5 minutes of knowing you. I mean, you're right. I kind of I'm always looking for how's it going to, I want it to change. But that's another thing that I've kind of relinquished and let go of. Like when you said that thing to me that you will inherit this. There will be I kind of think that we will inherit revolution. Because that's another thing I learned making that show is that, great men and the narrative of the great man is, I think, just that, a story. That the independence of India is the story of 250 million Indian people, however many it was, and the story of Malcolm X is the story of the civil rights struggle of African Americans, and the story of Che Guevara, millions of ordinary Cubans. But the way we tell stories is through avatars and symbols and individuals. None of the stuff we're saying, Bob's going to matter at all if people listen to this just go, I don't know what the fuck these two guys are talking about. It just sounds like words. I'm happy. I like my job. I like my wife. I like X Factor or American Idol. Or I like football. And I like a lot of those things. I love West Ham United. I love the music of the Smiths. I love culture. There's lots of cultural artifacts that I'm attracted to and attached to. But what I suspect is that what we're saying will resonate with people. People will hear it, and that word "resonate" is a pertinent one. There'll be a vibration comes out of our mouths, and that vibration is moving at the same speed as a vibration in someone's heart or consciousness.
They call it a receptor site in the brain.
What is that?
Hormone. Well, receptor. You can have a neurotransmitter for happiness or something like that gets secreted, but then another part of the brain receives it. And if the receptor site is there, it never makes the connection. So you have to have receptor sites. When you speak, there has to be a receptor. People have to listen to it and say, yes, this is unfair. I can just disengage. I can demand something greater. It isn't sufficient to allow the banks to be crippling poor farmers around the world so that Americans can buy their bananas at 10 cents cheaper a pound, and then it's just grinding the poor farmers around the world, or genetically modified food. There has to be that receptor site. And for me, that's been my focus with meditation. For me, and we call it the David Lynch Foundation for Consciousness-Based Education, which is bringing meditation to the individual and world peace. Consciousness-based education, which means what do you do? Education these days is all about basically cramming as much information into a kid's head as possible. So the focus on education has been, here's the information, and now I'm going to deliver it to you through computers, through iPods, through whatever. So I'm going to take that information, but nothing has been on the child. How awake is the child? How discriminating is the child? How healthy is the child? The learner, learning readiness, the ability to think, this is true, this is not true. And that's what consciousness-based education, that's what Transcendental Meditation in schools, or in prisons or anywhere, wakes up the brain, wakes up the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the size of your fist. It's behind your forehead. That's the higher brain. That's judgment, decision-making, discrimination, problem-solving. Stress, fatigue, drugs, bad food takes that frontal lobe offline. So when you're out talking to people, sometimes to the media, they don't have a frontal lobe. They're just reacting, overreacting. Meditation restores that part of the brain, its functioning, in a healthy, integrated way. So consciousness-based education is wake up the full brain, allow a child to absorb knowledge, discriminate, this is true, this is not true, in my own terms, not based on someone manipulating me. And then the second part is world peace. David Lynch and Maharishi wanted to set up large groups of people, have actual peace universities in every country of 1,000 or 8,000 students going to school, learning the principles of peace, meditating together, and actually creating an influence of peace. Not all these war colleges and defense institutes, but actually creating peace. So I want to support what you're doing, what you're saying, by creating more meditators in the world, because then they'll be more awake. They eat better, they think more carefully. Even when you said at the beginning that you don't get angry as quickly, this frontal lobe part of your brain that's the rational filter against impulsive decisions. That's overreacting, stopping you from. The amygdala is the fear center. When you've been traumatized, as you were in your youth, or as many of us have been, either individual experiences or over time, that amygdala is turned on. We overreact to everything, even if we don't want to. The veteran coming back from combat, the child who lives in a crime-ridden neighborhood in East LA, the amygdala is on. They overreact to everything, and that shuts down the frontal lobe. Meditation, transcending to whatever extent, you can see it on the EEG machine, strengthens those connections and settles the amygdala back down to its appropriate. You need it. You need to overreact if a tiger's chasing you or if someone's chasing you, but you don't need it on all the time.
A lot of people, is it going to be more affordable to more people? You know, because like TM, because of the way it's taught, it can be an expensive process. Is it the intention of the David Lynch Foundation to make it accessible more?
The David Lynch Foundation has provided scholarships for 500,000 kids and adults to learn for free all over the world. 500,000. Our goal is to be at 10 million within 3 years, and that happens from. Already so much money is being given in grants to help students, to help veterans from the government. But it's just going to drugs. It's going to give them a handful of medication. And so there's an enormous amount of money that could be directed to something preventive. So that's one thing. And the second thing is we're working now that when a single mom is working at a company, at a business, she'll get to hear about TM in the company. She'll learn on company time, paid by the company as part of their health package, and meditate on company time. That's already starting to happen because healthcare costs are killing business, and healthcare is largely fueled by stress. The problem that I have, when I first learned to meditate, I always wanted to give TM away for free. That's great, but then the fact of the matter is there's a lot of traumatized people in the world, and they need not just meditation, they need a good follow-up. They need to have caring teachers who's there to help them. So I need to find a way, or we need to find a way to ensure that the teachers have a salary, that they could become a TM teacher and raise a family, go on a 2-week vacation. So I want to make it a profession. You're not going to get rich, but it should be a profession that you can raise a family. And ideally, long answer here, but a thorough one, every school, the guidance counselor should be trained as TM teachers. Every prison, there should be, guards should be trained as TM teachers. It shouldn't be that you have to have a TM teacher come in. It should just be part of, in the fabric of society. That's our goal, to transition to that. Never to deny a person to learn to meditate, ever. If they want to learn and they're genuine and they don't have money. But the people who do have money can help support the people who don't. So was that a clear answer?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, it pains me that a person wouldn't be able to learn because of finances, and we're doing everything we can so that never is the situation.
I suppose that we're sufficient people trained in meditation. Like David once said to me once, he goes, how do you explain to someone that's cynical? How do you say to them, how do you explain to them what you want and how you want to change the world, and how do you explain the significance of spirituality? And David just went, well, just say to them, learn to meditate, and we'll talk again. Sometimes it's just they've got to just learn to meditate. If enough people know, change will come.
Well, the change, I always say this, you still have to have economic change. You still have to have change in the healthcare system. You still have to have equal pay. You still have to have healthy food. You still have to have those. You need people working for those things and better energy sources. At the same time, though, we can't leave out the individual himself or herself. That person can't go around just stressed out of their mind. Now, trauma and toxic stress has been called the Black Plague of the 21st century because modern medicine has no way to prevent it or cure it. So in addition to these things, what I'm doing with the David Lynch Foundation, what we're all doing, is we're saying, here's another thing. You have to have this. You have to have your own creativity. You have to have your own connection, whether you call it consciousness or spirituality. You have to have that awakening. And then you'll have more receptor sites. So then when you're talking or someone is talking about these things, they don't go, oh, I don't know, I'm just going to have another beer and, I'll just grind it out. You go, wait a minute. I'm 64 years old. I remember, I went back to my high school graduation, and I remember in 1968, all these people who want to make a change in the world, and they're just worn down. They're just by life. How do you handle, because you get hammered. You get hammered. I mean, people love you. I love going to when your performances and your shows, you're just mobbed and people love you, but how do you handle that?
I don't know, because I'm really sensitive. I don't know how.
No, I know that.
I don't know how I cope.
I'm being genuine.
I know, because I'm a person who cares. You're not supposed to care what other people. I'll tell you why. Because I've got a relationship with my essential self, and at essence, I'm connected to some fundamental truths that are quite powerfully protecting. I'm trying no longer to emanate from the place where other people's approval is that important. Are other people's opinions are that important, as I know they are fleeting visitors to the transient. I'll just, someone adores me and thinks I'm magnificent, and for a while I think, yeah, that's great that you think that, and then it goes. Or someone, you're worthless, and then that goes. And I have passion. I have attachment. I care, and I'm into the material and the flesh. I'm not a person that has a sort of I'm not aloof, I'm not detached.
No.
So when people are critical, I guess, some of the stuff that we've already said, I sort of think in them there is divinity and great beauty. And as much as within me there are flaws and problems, so I try not to attach too much meaning to their criticism or to my emotions, as these are just transitory, fleeting energy patterns that will pass by. I try to recognize that anything I feel is momentary. I heard a really interesting thing the other day about I don't know who this yogi was. You might be able to work it out from the anecdote. Bertrand Russell, the intellectual and early CND, Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament pioneer, was towards the end of his life, I think, real committed to that whole CND deal, and he was visited by a yogi who said to him, look, what does it matter if we get rid of nuclear weapons? We are still the consciousness that created nuclear weapons. It will find some other outlet. What we need to address is the inner space, this intention, this attention, the desire to create that kind of technology. As long as we have that, we won't resolve the issue. The nuclear weapon is a symbol, an emblem, an expression of that phenomena, of that frequency. So we should address that. And Bertrand Russell said, no, let's just get rid of nuclear weapons. This is a really significant issue. I ain't got time to get into your mystical, bloody Vedic approach to it. Let's get rid of the weapons. I think it's possible to agree with both men in that instance. And the people that criticize me, people that adore me, they're responding really to themselves. They're responding to their own consciousness. They're responding to their own reality. And so I try to, now I know what my intention is. I know where my attention is. And that is what defines my life. I try not to allow my experience of reality to be too diluted by other people's input. I mean, I love the approval, and I'm not so keen on the condemnation. But like also I look a lot at the source. I look a lot where it comes from. And like, you know, I don't mind Fox News hating me. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. You know, that I can't change who I am for Fox News. What would I become?
I remember the transience you're talking about. I remember once there was a reporter many years ago who wrote this very damning article about Transcendental Meditation or something. And then 30 years later, he came in and I taught him to meditate. I didn't say anything, and he loved it, and he wrote this absolutely beautiful column. It was a column.
How long later?
20 years, 30 years
Took him,
later.
he did 20 years.
Yeah, but he came and he wrote it, loved it. And I didn't say anything at first. I said, do you remember what you wrote? And he said, no, he didn't remember anything. But it just made me realize everyone changes. Everyone can change. Everyone, and it's just fleeting, and it's like nothing. Last points, and that is, we're now in schools, and kids love you, and we're starting some rehab programs. Would you just say something to them about why they may be interested?
Because they'll listen to this, will they?
Yes.
What are they? There's some kids.
They're the kids, and then I want you to talk right here when you answer the question.
Hello, you're a kid. I'm now going to be speaking directly to you. So you look into my eyes, I'm looking into your eyes. We are connected with one another. We may not be in the exact same moment of time. I am now a hologram from the past. This person that's speaking may already be dead. Cells in my body that are helping to formulate this information have expired. Maybe this entire entity is expired, but the information I'm about to give you is true. What's the question, Bob?
The question is, why should a young kid, 12, 14, 15 years old, be interested in Transcendental Meditation?
You're a young kid. You're on the precipice of puberty. Soon there are going to be hormonal changes in your body that are going to be extremely confusing for you. You're going to receive signals that you do not have the mental apparatus to interpret. You have got a cultural matrix that is broadcast information right into your little young brain that's going to make you feel excessive fear and unnecessary desire. Through the experience of Transcendental Meditation, you will learn to filter and judge this information from a new perspective. If I'd had access to Transcendental Meditation when I was your age, I may not have squandered the decades I did pursuing drugs and other sensual experiences. Transcendental Meditation in adolescence, in your teenage years or in your childhood, is going to be invaluable to you.
And now also programs with drug abuse. Like this is really important because we're having a lot of people coming to us and saying we want to have programs, and could you get Russell to say, even take a minute or two, why this would help them overcome addiction?
Yes. Hello there, I'm talking to you, you're a drug addict. What were you thinking? Dirty business. Oh dear, think of your family, you've really let them down. I'm only joking. I'm a drug addict as well. Now, the reason I became a drug addict, you might not know this yet, it'll be the same sort of reason. I took drugs really as a sort of an anesthetic, as a distraction, because it was one of the few things in my life that gave me any comfort. Why is it that all the way through my life I felt this sense of irritation, this agitation, this emptiness, this hollowness, this feeling that something's not quite there, this feeling that there's something just beyond my grasp, this sort of loneliness, a hollowness in me always that nagged away at me. And when I found sort of every progressive drug, cannabis, LSD, crack, heroin, each of them are greeted as tiny little powdery prophets, solutions to the problem of my inner angst. But, none of them worked with, and you know this now, because what are you? You're in some sort of rehab. Are they in a rehab, are they? You idiot! You're in a rehab. It's obviously not. Well, why do you even need me to tell you? Well, the thing is that what I have learned is that what I was looking for all that time was a sense of union, a sense of connection. I heard once all desire is the inappropriate substitute for the desire to be at one with God. Who knows that more than we? I think we drug addicts are very religious people. I think we have a yearning for something potent. And life's not just enough. It's enough for us other people to go have a few drinks, have a bit of a smoke, even a couple of lines, and they're all right with it. Why for us must there be more? Why for us is there the subsequent misery? Because for us these flimsy scraps are never going to be enough. We want the real connection. We want the absolute connection. And the thing is that connection exists, and it's possible to find it. It's possible that you, in fact, could find it now. First, you have to remove the chemicals and the substances. You have to get rid of them. I believe in abstinence-based recovery. I believe in harm reduction where necessary to get you to abstinence-based recovery, but I believe if you're a drug addict of the nature that I am, that you have to remove drugs from your life. Then what I think is you have to create the conditions for a spiritual experience. You have to create the conditions. I heard a wonderful analogy once. Apparently, if you live in rural America, and I can't imagine what that must be like, but if you do, you have to build a post box, you have to put a post up, and you have to build the post box, the exact specifications. Otherwise, the mail, the US mail, they ain't going to deliver your letters. So every morning, if you can't be thinking, I can't be bothered to build a mailbox, they can just chuck it on the lawn. You might not get any letters, and you might therefore receive the information in your head that no one loves you, no one cares about you, but you didn't build the conditions for the letters to be delivered. I think getting clean from drugs and following 12-step based abstinence programs is creating the conditions for a spiritual experience. We have to create the conditions for the letter to be delivered. Once we create the conditions for the spiritual experience, which isn't easy, it isn't easy, but it's easier than being a drug addict in active addiction. Once you create those conditions, then it is possible for the spiritual condition. Then you will need the support of a community of like-minded people. I think this is true for any transcendence, for any spiritual life. You have to first of all receive the message, and then you need the support of a community, unless you're hardcore enough to go it alone at the foot or the top of a mountain dressed in a sheet, and I'm not there yet.
And Transcendental Meditation would do what for them?
Transcendental Meditation will give you the access to God. It will give you access to a peace. It will give you an access to a consciousness that is not entirely defined by yourself and your conditions as you understand them. It will give you sanctuary and serenity. That's what it's done for me. It's become an integral part of my life as a recovering drug addict is Transcendental Meditation. That's where I access what is known as the 11th step. Conscious contact with God. Conscious contact with God for me comes through Transcendental Meditation. It's a huge part of my recovery.
And the show ends. Thank you very much for all of this. Today is Halloween. This is being aired on Halloween. What's your Halloween message to America, Russell Brand?
My Halloween message to America is probably that word hallows. Isn't that to do with the awesomeness of God? Hallowed, like it's something we've got to revere. Revere God, I think. Revere the unknown, not in a jack-o'-lantern macabre trick-or-treat way. There are more tricks and more treats than you can possibly imagine out there in the hallowed realms of the unknown that you can access with a simple journey within.
Thank you very much, dear friend, brother. I love you very much.
Cheers, Bobby Roth.
Yeah, thank you for doing this.
This is Success Without Stress with Bob Roth on Sirius XM Indie.